Bet horse racing on DRF Bets. We'll match your first deposit of $200. Get free expert picks and past performances, plus weekly cash back. All from Daily Racing Form, the most trusted name in horse racing.
Hey everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski are taking a look at the final race on California Cup Saturday at Santa Anita. Plenty of stakes races for the California breds on this 10-race Saturday card, and the 10th of those races is the Unusual Heat Turf Classic. This one going 1.1 miles on the turf course for older horses. A field of 9 signed on, Craig, though there are some rumblings that it could scratch down to 8 because the horse that we haven't seen the Morning Lion yet, but I imagine the horse that will be the favorite in this race if he runs, the number 3, the Chosen Vron. He's cross-entered in the California Cup Sprint on dirt earlier in the day, and it sounds like he could go in that spot instead.
Yeah, that was reported by Brad Free and DRF. It looks like that's what the trainer is going to choose. He's going to be a formidable foe in either of the two races, but it doesn't sound like he'll be in this one.
Yes, and his presence or likely absence in this race really does have some ramifications, especially with regard to the pace, as we take a look at the Timeform US pace projector, because he's shown on the lead in the pace projector, which makes some sense because he does have plenty of tactical speed, and he's shown it in his recent sprint start. So stretching out to the 1 1/8 distance, you'd imagine that the Chosen Vron would be on the lead if he runs here. If he doesn't run here, Craig, I think the lead is kind of up for grabs in this race.
I would agree, and I also think if he does not run, that we're going to see that blue flag pop up that says it's going to favor horses on or near the early lead. That's something the pace projector is fluid. It's going to adapt as horses are scratched or if they are withdrawn from the race.
Yeah, some of the horses that are shown towards the back of the pack, the deep closers, like the number 8, Carmelita's Man, and the number 9, Love, they could have their work cut out for them if this race really does slow down towards the front end. And before we move on to the PPs, let's take a look at one of the new features in Timeform US, the finish projector. You can find this by looking at Timeform US on your DRF mobile PPs, just toggling over to that Timeform US tab and the finish projector. And this is basically a visual representation of the power picks that you might be familiar with, chosen by the Timeform US algorithm. And Craig, kind of interesting to see that the Timeform US, even with the number 3, the Chosen Vron in the race, was predicting a slight upset and a photo finish, the number 4, Coalinga Road, nosing that one out. And I think that's a result that you and I might not be too upset by.
No, I mean, when you look at the speed figures, he fits. He's been a little bit faster than the Chosen Vron. And when you look at this finish projector, you notice it does give margins. And if you take that 3 out of there, it's going to be a pretty big gap back to the second horse.
Let's take a look at some of the contenders in this race, and we will begin with the Chosen Vron. He might not run in this spot. He might be going in that dirt race instead, but we'll take a look at his last turf race in case his trainer does decide to change his mind and go in this spot instead. And this came 2 back in the California flag that were going down the hill this day, so just 6.5 furlongs, and you can see the Chosen Vron splitting horses here, getting up for the victory. This was just the second turf start of his career, his first victory on the surface, and Craig, I think this is evidence that he handles the turf just fine, and based on his recent dirt performances, he just looks like the classiest horse in this race if he does wind up in this race.
Yeah, he seems to handle everything fine, whether it's sprinting, routing, the hill, turf, dirt. He always seems to run his race. So if he shows up, he's obviously going to be a serious factor.
Yeah, and I will make the point that his prior turf race, which we're going to talk about in more depth in just a little bit, he maybe didn't get the best ride that day, probably could be 2 for 2 on the turf. So obviously the Chosen Vron would be pretty formidable if he ran in this spot. Another horse that was in that replay we just watched is the number 1, Alligato, and he's actually the defending champion in this Unusual Heat Turf Classic. That was a year ago that he won the race, but just 3 starts ago in Alligato's PPs because he was off for a long time after winning this race last year. He's now been working his way back. This is his 3rd start off the layoff, Craig, stretching back out to the 1 1/8 distance. His 2 recent performances maybe not up to the level that he achieved last year, but maybe we'll see a better effort this time.
I would hope maybe 3rd off the layoff. He doesn't seem to be quite as good as he was this year. Maybe he was pointing to this race. It's a little tough to say for me, but I also think this field's a bit tougher than what we saw last year.
I would agree with that. There were some short prices when you look back through that chart and the replay that were no shows that brought up the rear that day. So I think it made the race a little bit easier for an improving horse like Allegato. This could be a tougher spot if the Trojan Vron participates. If he doesn't run, maybe it's not a much tougher spot than the one he competed in last year. The horse drawn right outside of him is the number 2, Doc Adams. And Greg, it's hard to fault his recent form. He's looking for his 5th victory in a row, but this reformed $25,000 claimer could have a tough time making the step up in class.
Yeah, that's really the only knock on him. He's won on dirt. He's won on turf a couple times since being clean for just 25,000. So he's obviously in very good form, and he's probably going to be on the front end. Or I should say probably. The pace projector shows him on the front end. I think it's a little iffy because he's not really a speed horse, but it kind of shows you how little speed there may be in this race, especially if the Chosen Vron taps out.
Yeah, I think his connections would be wise to try to go towards the front from this inside post position, especially with there potentially being less speed in this race. I think looking through his past performances, he might be slightly better on dirt than he is on turf, but he did win on turf too back with a solid speed figure, so maybe that's just splitting hairs. He will be one of the bigger prices in this field. Moving a couple posts to his outside, the number 4, Coalinga Road, is another runner that I think you can consider who's making that switch from the dirt back to the turf course. And he's won on turf in the past, Craig. Did lose his 2 most recent turf starts at Del Mar this summer, but I don't think he got ideal trips on either occasion.
No, I was going to say the same thing. I think he is the opposite of the horse we just talked about, where he might be a little bit better on turf than he is on dirt, and maybe the finish positions don't show that. But I don't think he's had ideal trips in either of his recent turf races, and he ran just as fast as he has on dirt. So I think he's one that has a big shot in here.
The other point I'll make about this horse is that while he's come from far back in both of those turf races that are showing in this snapshot of the PPs, he is a runner who has shown more tactical speed in prior starts. He once was a turf sprinter and a dirt sprinter much earlier in his career, showing more tactical speed in those faster paced races. So I think John Velasquez would be wise to try to get him a little bit more forward from this inside post position. And also his last 2 dirt races are so much better than any of the dirt races that he had run earlier in his career. And I think that just speaks to the fact that he may just be a horse that is in the best form of his career right now. Moving to his outside is the number 5, Kings River Knight. We'll take a look at his race going all the way back to the beginning of October. This was his last turf start, and actually it was his 3rd victory in a row on the turf, as he is undefeated on that surface. And Craig, I think the biggest question for this horse is, has he been facing as tough of competition as he's going to meet in this turf start moving back to Southern California?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a step up, but it's not like his speed figures are way below what we've seen from some others in here. I'm willing to put a line through those last couple races on synthetic where he ran okay, but it just looks like maybe he handles the turf a little bit better. He's probably still in very good form based on the results of those races.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the ones with more upside in this race, even though he's a 5-year-old. He's only raced 6 times in his career, has never been out of the exacta. So there could be forward to go for Kings River Knight, and he probably does have to take a slight step forward to beat this field, especially if that expected favorite participates here. Let's talk about another race from earlier in the year. This one took place at Del Mar over the summer, and we talked a little bit about the Chosen Vron and how he didn't have maybe the success that he could have in this California Dreamin' Stakes. The 2 other runners that finish ahead of him here are Bang for Your Buck and Carmelita's Man. And Carmelita's Man is the one who's doing the late running. Bang for Your Buck is trying to hold things together on the front end. And the Chosen Vron, who had some traffic trouble, he's the one who's closing outside of those 2, kind of between horses inside that gray horse. They all hit the wire together, Craig. And Carmelita's Man, hard to fault his recent form. He did come back off that victory, win again before losing his last race. But he's one of the runners that could be impacted if there's not a lot of pace.
Yeah, he's one that doesn't have a lot of speed. You can see two back. He won his race going 1.3 miles, meaning he doesn't mind the distance at all. He turned back in against Open Company trying the mile. The horse that he won that race that day, Air Force Red, has since come back with a very nice win. And I believe it was a graded stakes race with a big 120 plus speed figure that day. So it was a much stronger field than he's going to face here.
And then we have Bang for Your Buck, who finished just ahead behind Carmelita's Man in that race that we just watched. I think the problem with him, Craig, is unlike some others in this race who just love to win races, maybe not the case for Bang for Your Buck, who just has 2 wins and 19 career starts with plenty of second and third place finishes. But the positive that you can say about him, which is something we saw in that replay, is he does have tactical speed. So he's another one that could potentially be forwardly placed.
I was going to say the same thing. He's a horse who you see a lot of 1s, 2s, and 3s in his past performances there, particularly in those recent running lines. Doesn't really finish off his races, though. As you said, I'm not a fan of horses that have finished second and third 9 times versus only 2 wins.
Well, let's throw up our picks for this race. And Craig and I both have the Chosen Vron in there. Craig has him third and I have him second. I think both of our fact we didn't pick this horse, maybe recognizing some hesitation from the connections that maybe not running in this race. But Craig and I did land on the same alternative, the number 4, Coalinga Road, who we've already discussed a little bit. Just a horse that seems like he's in great form right now, Craig.
He does, and I like that you pointed out Johnny Velasquez is staying on. He rode him in that dirt sprint, so he knows he has some early speed, which I think he's going to need to use here. And he just seems like the best horse to me. Even if the Chosen Vron had stuck around, I think this race favored him a little more, being a turf route. And with that one possibly and even likely coming out, I think he's going to be a very strong contender, and hopefully we'll get a decent value on him.
Yeah, if the Chosen Vron does scratch, I think that could hurt Coalinga Road's price a little bit. But he just does seem like a horse that's coming into this race doing pretty well, had run so well in those last couple of dirt races. And obviously, he's shown in the past that he can handle the turf. So it's the number 4, Coalinga Road, for both Craig and I in the Unusual Heat Turf Classic on Saturday at Santa Anita. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.